Right, welcome to the wayward, long-delayed sequel to Deep Lessons of Soul, Skip Steps in Evolutionary Astrology. I'm Greg Crawford, and this is a sequel of one I did with Diana Vallejos a couple months ago. And today we are working with Star Trace, who's volunteered her chart, and we're going to be looking into her skip step. So in case you don't know what skip steps are, it's a term developed by Jeff Green in his evolutionary astrology system, which involves whenever you have a planet or multiple planets squaring the lunar nodes. This has been a long-standing signature that's been considered important in astrology. So it's been known as something that the individual has to repeatedly face over and over again in their lifetime. And in Jeff Green's work, he's really exploring the question why this is happening and going into guidance also into unlocking what the actual meaning of the skip step is and how to resolve it. So the reason it's called a skip step is because whatever archetypes are involved in the skip step signature, which sometimes is a very complicated mix, which we actually have today with Star. She's got a lot of stuff involved in her skip step. Whatever those archetypes are, this is signifying a pattern the soul has been going back and forth regarding without fully integrating or resolving the evolutionary lesson. And so this is going back lifetimes and lifetimes. When you have a planet or planet squaring lunar nodes, it doesn't just mean that only the south node of the moon is really representing the past life pattern. It really means that both ends, both the south node and the north node side of the moon, have been really significant across lifetimes, and the person has been really kind of going back and forth between those. And then so Diana and I both have skip steps also in our charts. So it's something that we're also speaking from our personal experience on. So whenever you're ready to go to the next slide, you can. I can add in there while it's going. I have Mercury and Diana's kind of a Venus Chiron skip step signature. So we got here an image of a swamp in Louisiana and some Mardi Gras time there. So it's kind of nice that this delayed meeting is now lining us up with Mardi Gras. So I did an astrology consultation, at this point it was a couple of months ago, but with somebody, and she had a very intense skip step signature in her chart. And it was interesting to me, it was a very intense one, rivaling what we're gonna be looking at today with Star. And when she was describing it, she was talking about it feeling like she was in quicksand or a swamp. And this woman's at this point in her early 60s, and she's really done tons and tons of inner work, really more than most people you're gonna encounter. And yet even in her early 60s, there's really still elements of the skip step pattern she was still struggling with. And so one thing you have to realize when you have a skip step signature, it's something that you are really going to be spending your whole life gaining awareness of. And you're going to be continually peeling away deeper and deeper levels and layers of that pattern. Sometimes it's going to feel really frustrating because it feels like you're stuck, because it might seem like, why is this one issue, keep coming up over and over again? I already thought I dealt with this, and then here comes something else that seems like it's the same situation. I really like the idea of connecting swamps with skip steps, which is why I put this image in here. Personally, I grew up in Louisiana and spent a lot of time in swamps and bayous as a child. It's like significant childhood memories for me. And one thing about swamps are, they have like stagnant water that isn't really flowing. And so in that way, it is a fitting image for how the skip step pattern repeatedly showing up can make you feel like you're stuck, more so than being in the flow or whatever. But what I also really like about swamps, and the swamp as a symbol for this, because a swamp really is a place of soul and deep soul. You know, there's life in a swamp. There's really magical creatures who are coexisting in multiple elements, such as like frogs or like water birds, crawfish, you know, alligators. And in the case of alligators, there's even this sort of slumbering danger that's lurking in the swamp that could be awakened at any moment. Swamps really have a magnetism to them. They're really beautiful. And similarly to that, whatever the skip step pattern is, we're magnetized by that. We're going to be continually drawn to that skip step pattern. We're going to desire to be drawn. And we're going to keep having to go back into those issues. So instead of just cursing ourselves or blaming ourselves for repeatedly falling back into whatever that pattern is, it's important to realize it's necessary for us to follow our desires into that skip step in order to gain the experiences that are required so that we can then receive the awareness we actually need that's going to help us actually make the new choices that will lead us to break out of that pattern. So the related hardships, you know, they might feel really difficult, but you have to remember that at the same time, those are bringing really important realizations that we're able to integrate. And you can move on to the next slide then, whenever you're ready there. So the next image I just have here is a mirror. So on one hand, it's sort of this idea of going into like the swamp, you know, just that we have to kind of go back into these issues. Star has stars in the Pluto and Libra generation, such as myself, and you know, the mirrors of relationships are for Pluto and Libras particularly resonant, but really mirrors in general are a good image for any sort of skip step pattern, because basically the issues that are happening in our current lifetime, and on one hand, they're mirroring these same patterns we've dealt with in previous lifetimes. You know, we really find ourselves when we look in the mirror. We find our own sense of soul in our own reflection. And similarly, our relationships in the world are mirroring and reflecting back to us the issues that are related to our skip step. It often takes a lot of time and different challenges or just difficult things like we've talked about, but eventually we're going to start realizing that the people we're attracted to, as well as the people that we're repulsed by. So it's really both. People we're drawn to, people that we're not really drawn to, but still have this really big charge to them, that they're mirroring to us important aspects of that skip step pattern. And we'll start, you know, recognizing that a lot more clearly as we get into it. The soul patterns related to the skip steps, as well as Pluto in evolutionary astrology, the way that's, you know, talked about and developed, those archetypes, we project those into our relationships. And that's one of the kind of first things, just like first steps, you just have to kind of realize is how you're projecting all this material into the relationships that you have. And we can at times be compulsively drawn into relationships that connect us to this skip step pattern. And sometimes we really lose ourselves in desiring to merge with that other person or that external source of some soul quality that actually, we actually hold that quality deep within ourselves. And another thing that can happen is we can become dishonest. And that's not really necessarily just to be trying to deliberately deceive other people, but really about being in denial about ourselves and refusing to open our awareness to our true feelings and desires. And that's going to lead us then to, you know, not be honest with others because we're not being honest with ourselves. And, you know, that's when people tell you, you need to go look at yourself in the mirror and really develop a lot of honesty about what's really going on within and gaining awareness of those unconscious patterns. And as that starts to happen, we start gaining that ability to start making those new choices that are going to start liberating us from the skip pattern. One thing that I've really found in my life with my skip step is as I sort of resolve a layer of it, certain types of relationships in my life just start dissolving. And then these new relationships come in and they're really embodying this deeper level of what I'm kind of working on at this point. And then I need to, again, start working on gaining that kind of awareness and integrating the experience. To stop losing ourselves in the way we project ourselves and our soul desires in the relationship, we first have to admit and gain awareness for the fact that we're projecting in the first place. And then we have to integrate how the qualities that are reflected in our relationships are in fact qualities about ourselves that we are being called to embody. And as we start doing that, and what happens then is, instead of relating to somebody and you're kind of relating to this thing you're projecting at them, you start relating to who the other person actually is in that relationship. And then this kind of deeper level of the mirror effect kind of happens, where there's this sort of divinity of both people can be reflected back and forth. And the thing I wanted to share that actually the timing of this meeting was good, because this woman I'm friends with in Olympia, where I live, her name's Pamela Norris. She actually is a former tarot teacher of mine, and she's sort of one of the wise or elder women that I've looked up to in my life. And she does a daily tarot on Facebook. It's called Pamela's Daily Tarot, so you could probably find that. And today she had the Lover's card. And I just want to read what she wrote, because it relates to what I was thinking about here. She wrote, this card pulses with the constant rhythm of decision. In most areas of life, it means we must make the difficult decision to let go of something we have in order to grasp something that we want. We must step from the known into the unknown. In relationship, any kind of committed relationship, it takes a slightly different form. There's still a decision to be made, but one that is more internalized. There's a point at which the dream we have carried in our hearts about relationships thins, primarily because the object of our love, the screen upon which we have projected this dream, refuses to make it real, and we must decide to let the illusion go. In making this decision, we encounter an amazing opportunity to know someone else as they are, rather than as we demand them to be. Stripped of expectation, the relationship now has a space to grow into itself. This is scary business where we are now surrendering to the mystery. We can only deepen our intimacy from this point. The deepening cannot root in the illusion. We can see how our need to control and orchestrate had obscured our vision and blocked our progress. We see the insanity in allowing the dream to calcify us in our emotional experience, rather than inspire us in exploration and discovery. So anyway, I just like that a lot. It goes with kind of what I'm thinking here in terms of, how you have these patterns, we tend to project them. And as we start integrating these things and stop projecting them all the time, or at least gaining awareness of that, it helps us open up to that actual real intimacy we can have in our relationships, which is something stars of Pluto Libra is going to be here to do. And so I think we can go to the next slide then, which should be her chart. And I believe Diana is going to introduce her signature. I don't know if I need to.
So here we have a star's chart. As you can see, her skip step is Pluto, Saturn, and Libra, 10th house, squaring the nodal axis. Pluto in itself is squaring the nodal axis, as most of us already know, intensifies the person's experience and the need to recover those skip steps as well, as these are issues the soul has been dealing with for many lifetimes. The person will typically feel a constant pull-push intensity of issues regarding the South Node and the North Node, and this is because in prior lives the person acted upon both of them, yet didn't succeed in recovering or resolving any of them. So in order to break through from this back and forth and recover the skip steps, we have to integrate the resolution node, which in Star's case is the North Node, Cancer, 7th house. And her resolution node, of course, has to be integrated through her Pluto's polarity point, which is 4th house, Aries. Yeah, okay. So let's start with the past, her South Node. So as we can see, Saturn also rules the South Node Venus conjunction in Capricorn, which brings us back to the core of the skip step, which pretty much just lets us know how significant the dynamic of the skip step is in Star's life, as well as how strong and intense is the pull from her past, which it is part of the Pluto skip step signature, but also because she has that weight of Venus hanging on her South Node, which Venus rules Libra, and Libra is where the skip step is. So certainly it adds that extra pull to the past. So indeed, there is great intensity and pressure, but it all serves to accelerate the soul's evolutionary intent, which in her case is ultimately about transforming the way she connects and relates to herself. And this is represented by Venus, on her South Node and Resolution Node, 7th house archetype. So indeed, there is the need to deeply transform how she relates to herself and, of course, others by deeply connecting to her emotional body. And this, again, is represented by the Cancer node of Resolution and Pluto polarity point 4th house, which is the same archetype. So the need to connect to the emotional body is imperative in order to reestablish her inner security, her inner stability, her values, inner values, and inner authority. And of course, minimize the outside dependencies so she can stand firm on her own and break free from the thick conditioning of the past. And that thick conditioning, of course, correlates to it being in Capricorn and the square to Saturn, Pluto in the 10th house. So let's see, Linda, could you please show the next slide? Yeah, I think it would be the next one. So I truly connected to this picture when I thought of you, Star. To me, it truly symbolizes the evolutionary intent of your soul, just like this determined, healthy, thriving flower who had to nurture and strengthen her roots to rise from the depths and break through the concrete, through those hard walls of conditioning, of limitation, and into expansion, possibility, and experience the victory that it created for itself and within itself. To me, this picture is very symbolic of your Pluto polarity point 4th house, Aries. So we can go back to the chart so we can break it down.
Did you want to talk, Star, about how you relate to that some?
Yeah, I could talk about that.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, that was really beautiful interpretation, and I'm just honored to be here right now. So let's see. Well, Gray first asked what were some therapeutic processes that I've gone through, and I definitely related in the beginning of the presentation about doing all the inner work and still feeling that frustration. So I would say that I noticed the Saturn square the South Node in Venus ruled by Cap as like there's been a lot of paralyzation and frozenness to me throughout my life. And in 2010, I started to get into yoga. And then in 2012, I did a yoga teacher training certification, which was fantastic. But I think that thought out a lot of my own trauma. Got the moon in Aquarius, square Uranus. That's like a whole different thing. But so that started to open up the emotional body big time. And that's around when I started going, not so much a talk therapist as someone that was really into mindfulness and somatic body awareness and EMDR, which is trauma-based therapy, and just real being present with what's coming up in the moment. And I started that in summer of 2014. And then And then that October of 2014 was really cataclysmic, and that was when that Scorpio eclipse happened, and I wasn't even aware of astrology at the time very much, and that was when the death and rebirth really happened for me, and then the real work really started, and doing like
Wonder if did she get frozen there? Looks like maybe.
Okay, so we're focusing on her South Node Venus. Let's see. So from the past, we have South Node Venus in Capricorn first house. The archetype, let's see what we're dealing with for her past. The archetype of Venus, as we all know, represents the way in which we connect and relate to ourselves. It also represents our values and essential needs and how these needs are projected onto others, as well as how and why we attract the people we do. Capricorn, as we know, correlates to conditioning from parental, societal, religious, or some type of rigid structure and limitation. And the first house ultimately talks about the freedom we need in order to discover ourselves, tap into our awareness, and embrace our individuality and journey. So when we have Venus in Capricorn, we typically find a child who has been rejected, judged, or lacked the caring and emotional nurturing by one or both parents. As a result, the child grows up internalizing, suppressing, burying deep within their feelings and needs, which, as we know, when we suppress our feelings and needs, we completely distort them. The distortion tends to fracture the person's inner sense of authority, which in general makes them fearful to open up, fear of rejection, fear of being judged, fear of being truly vulnerable and express what they truly need and want in a relationship. So they tend to close up, or as the famous phrase says, they become emotionally frozen. So we generally find these individuals attracting partners, relationships that mirror back to them those integrated parts of themselves, as Gray was talking about with the mirrors. And of course, these dynamics can play out in various ways. For example, the person can attract controlling, judgmental partners who are not emotionally open, but play the same familiar role of the child-parent dynamic from the past. So again, repeating the same cycle. We can also find the opposite, where the person becomes the controlling partner to feed their false sense of security. We can also see individuals who attract more of the status quo types that live up to the reputation, yet their emotional lives are very frozen with little to no inner connection. Or two, we can find those who are very codependent and needy, as they are pretty much, relying on the partner to give them the emotional safety and nurturing that they didn't get as a child, which is also how they tend to lose their own sense of identity by living through the partner's dreams and realities, which could also be symbolized by the Neptune conjunct the ascendant in Sagittarius that we see in her chart, being in one way or another influenced by belief systems, Sagittarius, which tend to fog and weaken our own sense of self. So I had a lot of questions for a start in this regard, connecting her childhood conditioning to her relationships throughout her life. Like, given she's not with us right now.
With that Libra 10th too, I was going to state part of that's also kind of what you're already saying, but just really wanting the approval of other people or wanting to be liked, and that definitely can involve parents. And I think it's okay for us to share. I mean, she had some difficulty as far as not feeling nurtured by her mom, one of her parents, and then kind of seeking that parent's approval at the same time. So, you know, that's one thing that can definitely come in with that. And sort of like what Diana was just saying, the Saturn ruling that, but being balsamic to Pluto, it's really intense, and it's really something. I mean, this is a really, really deep pattern that's getting. She has the ability to start clearing it out this lifetime, but this is obviously something that goes really, really far back.
What I find about this pattern being in a balsamic, you know, it's culminating, it's trying to finish up. It wants resolution now, and what it's doing, and it's reflected in her chart. It's like it's pushing her to go within, you know, to truly minimize the outside distractions and go within, with all those planets in the 12th house, with that moon in Aquarius. It's all just pretty much telling her, go within, find your own, you know, break through that conditioning. And I think a big part of this too is aligning herself with a spiritual belief system in order to purify all those 12th house energies. And of course, a system that is based in natural law. But is she back? Are you back, Star?
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Okay, so I was talking about, for probably, I don't know how long I was talking about this, but I described the child conditioning that goes on with having Venus in Capricorn. And given it's in your south node, it makes the square to Saturn. I talked a little bit about how this could manifest, you know, in a parent not receiving the nurturing and caring from a parent, or like judgment. That's just part of that Capricorn archetype. So, and with your Venus in there, I wonder if, you know, I wonder about the conditioning of your childhood and how that influence your relationships throughout your life.
That's a great question. So I would say that as a kid, I was an only child and very lonely, like good girl, Venus in Cap, very responsible. I would say I more looked after my mom than she looked after me. And my dad was around, but just very judgmental and critical. And then, you know, my childhood's a pretty sticky situation. We don't necessarily want to get into all of that right now, but definitely has left some really deep wounds. And more importantly, with what Gray was saying in the beginning, was really pretty severe intimacy issues where it's hard for me to trust other people, or when I do go to do my North Node, you know, I remember Jeffrey Green saying this little flips out and goes back. And even though isolating and being alone is very safe, it's definitely not working anymore. And so where my computer crashed was saying where the real work started with the getting into the therapy and sort of digging into that deep swamp of the soul stuff to really get into that has definitely helped. But I mean, I would say 2 years into that and we've barely scratched the surface, but it's definitely been more the Aries 4th house polarity for me. And I would also say that, you know, prior to that, I mean, I've been in like support groups for a long time. I've done yoga, I meditate, I've read like every self-help book. Like I just got into astrology in 2015 and found Jeff Green's work, which I'm hugely inspired by. And evolutionary astrology just speaks directly to my heart.
And that's why I was saying start with, you know, your chart like really push you. I don't think you were on screen when I was saying this, really pushing you to go in, you know, and to align yourself with a spiritual system, with a belief system that of course is based on natural law. so you can purify all those 12 house energies that you have going on, so you can make sense of them, so you can integrate them in a proactive way. And when Gray and I were talking about this too, this was like a month ago, I saw your Uranus in 12th house, and for some reason it just came to me like how Uranus also represents trauma. And having all those planets in the 12th house is kind of like protecting you in a way from all the trauma that you may have experienced in past life. So in the 12th house, it's protected because it's not on your face, you know, because can you imagine having all of that right on your face? Like it would be more traumatic. So being in your subconscious, it requires work to get through it, to it, you know? So you get, what's the word? You get to access it little by little. As you do the work, you get deeper and deeper. You know what I mean? So when you get there, you know how to handle it. And that's part of that polarity 6th house as well. And all the work that you're doing with getting into astrology and all of that, I think it's also very representative of Saturn being transiting your 12th house, which is truly pushing you to get in touch with your subconscious world, you know, your Mercury, your Sun, everything that's in there.
Another thing with that too, just being Sagittarius, and it's all ruled by the Jupiter that's Scorpio, which actually rules your whole chart, being the ascendant ruler. But it's the Sag in the 12th, it also rules that. And that's one of the interesting things about the, when we look at that skip step signature, it's very Libra and 10th house. And we have, I mean, even as you're just, it's a very literal example in this case with Ceres and Pluto. And Ceres has more meaning than just being your mother, but it is interesting that that's such an issue. And then it's literally Ceres, Pluto. And that is a new phase, but Saturn being balsamic is so important. But as we mentioned before, but the Scorpio Jupiter is new phase to that Pluto. And so I really think that's interesting in terms of the deconditioning going on, because you do have that Aquarius moon, which if we're just looking like sun moon phase, that's like a crescent moon. So that is a moon that's kind of struggling to come out. And it actually goes exactly with the image that spoke to Diana, you know, like the flower kind of struggling to come up out of the concrete. That's very crescent moon. And crescent moons, you know, we have to really, I'm also a crescent moon. We have to really struggle to, we're coming into our meaning of this lifetime, and we are kind of getting pulled back at the same time. And so we have to really persist and continue to move forward and, you know, look around us for what support's available to us and whatever resources are available, which you're clearly already doing. And the other thing then is that Aquarius moon is more of like in terms of that skip step signature, it's like a first quarter trine. So and it's pretty close trining Pluto, only by like a couple of degrees off, and very even more closely trining the Ceres. And so there's real access there that in that emotional body, as Diana was speaking of, being in the 2nd house, and then Aquarius, it's perfect for all like the therapy and being Aquarius, you're going to be able to start objectifying and gaining some clarity about what's going in all that material. And then kind of connecting that back to the Scorpio Jupiter. Being Scorpio, it really needs to get into the deeper level. It also really needs to stir up this knowledge from your experiences. We're going to really want to push boundaries and push into some taboo things, because you're kind of breaking out of this cultural and parental conditioning. And so that knowledge you're going to be gaining from those experiences is really important as part of all this. I don't know if you want to say something, Diana, about that.
I certainly do. She made a comment. She said, you know, stay alone, but it's not working. Like it's not, and yeah, it's because you're not supposed to do that, you know, like with the node of resolution being in Cancer, it's truly asking you to be vulnerable, you know, to connect to your inner child, to let that child who perhaps was, you know, nurture, you know, express her needs, her wants. You have to feel like the need to hold space for that child is so important. And one of the quotes that I wanted to share said that, and let me pull. It said, vulnerability is the only bridge to build connection. And that vulnerability would be the Cancer, right? Connecting to your emotional body and building that connection, the bridge to that connection, you know, to your seventh house, to the way you relate to others. And so I think I think that being willing to take risks, to push, you know, to push yourself beyond what you know, um, out of your comfort zone, you know, the expectation of others, letting go of that, perhaps the old story, um, will help, you know, in opening you up more and connect.
Yeah, there's something else that's made me think of. I'm gonna kind of, unless is there anything about that star you want to say? Because that gave me an idea of something I'm kind of going in a different direction with. But so I don't want to. If there's anything about that you wanted to make a comment on.
Well, that just really reaffirms what I've been doing the past 2 years. It's definitely been a lot of what she's talking about happening. Still feeling safe with people. So a lot more work to do in the relational department, but as far as like the inner nurturance and showing up for myself, like that's been real successful, and a lot of that's happening, and even a lot of grief work's been happening as well. So that's it.
I think one part too is like, because your chart is so intense and like the need to be vulnerable and really connect to yourself is big. I think that having somebody who you truly trust, like, is it's you know, to express it out loud. I think it's so important because you, like, you don't have to hold it in, and as you express it, you'll be able to see what's emerging, you know, and rediscover those new things that are emerging. um so yeah, I think that would be like kind of a way to also help release that. Go ahead, Gray.
Yeah, that even just now I just thought of something else. So I'm gonna add in before I go to the other thing. I think we might have mentioned this already, or maybe you did, but when we're looking at our chart, the descendant or the seventh house is Gemini, and so that even because there's definitely the resolution of is Cancer in a seventh, and so everything Diana said is very true about the vulnerability and that, but that's also really part of that Gemini, because you need to you really need to communicate. You need to talk about your feelings. You need to have people that you can trust and communicate it to. And then how that Mercury that rules the seventh house takes you back into the 12th house, and it's very closely connected to Uranus, as well as Juno and Vesta. So it's pretty interesting. You got Juno and Vesta in between Uranus and Mercury. So that's a real signature of partnership. And in terms of a partner, that's a pretty unique partner, because we're talking about someone who's Uranus, Vesta, Juno, Mercury, and the Sun. But the Juno, I mean, Vesta, that would definitely, I mean, that I think that just because Mercury is with Juno and Vesta and Uranus, and it rules the seventh house. I mean, it even plays up even more the importance of having someone you can trust, and then you start accessing that deeper level of material. And then also in terms of the Jupiter ruling that in the 10th house, there's a way that this can go out into your public roles. That could even, I mean, I think with the therapy even being like in a counselor role, or like a kind of Scorpio Jupiter presence for people. And all that 10th house actually, you become this really powerful authority, actually. I mean, it's a really powerful 10th house. There's enormous power there. And I know you also do art, though. So one thing Diana was saying was just making me think, especially the idea of kind of striking out and really accessing your creativity and what you have to offer. There's that Chiron in Taurus in the 5th house. And I just want to make sure we mention this because it forms a grand Earth trine with Mars and Virgo in the 9th house. And then that south node of the moon that Venus is conjoining. And Mars in Virgo is particularly important because it's furthermore very closely applying to a square with Neptune. And it's also squaring your ascendant, descendant. And when you mentioned, for example, like the judgmental father, and we were talking about how maybe some of these patterns get mirrored in relationships, you know, that could be like a Mars and Virgo, Sagittarius. I mean, that could be like a really dogmatic, know-it-all, critical, you know, someone you really wouldn't want to deal with to be nurtured by it. It's not going to be a nurturing person, but it could be. So I mean, that's like the negative. That's like the negative manifestation of that, because Mars, Virgo, Sagittarius can actually be this very like discerning, very humble, very grounded, but at the same time expansive and visionary. And that's also who you are. And when it's coming from that wounded place of the Venus South Node wounded place relating to all this, if that's going in, because that grand Earth trine is just going to be flowing pretty harmoniously. And trines are great, but they can also keep us stuck in something because it's just such an easy thing to do. And if it's the Chiron wound and the Venus South Node wound kind of really informing that, it's going to kind of keep you in this kind of flowing stuck place a little bit. Yeah, if that Chiron Taurus, that's like you stepping into your own value, your own artistry. It's like in the 5th house, so it's very passionate and bold, and you kind of gain mastery over this material. And it's that Mars and Virgo can actually be very, like I said, very discerning. It's ruled by that Mercury with Uranus, so it's able to actually access all this material in the 12th house can actually all come out and be informing like the artistry you create, or a way you can be this powerful presence for other people in need of healing. And then the square to Neptune, I think that's kind of forcing some disillusioning experiences for you probably, but it's ultimately going to be helping you realign with your actual like reality and your own personal truth and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything about that, Diana?
No, I think you did a great job.
I don't know if you lost Star again.
She left. She got cut off, I think.
Okay.
But
yeah.
one thing that I want to add and connect it to the swamp, I think the swamp experience is very much needed. Like the crisis experience is very much needed in order to understand that, you know, you have to be in it, you have to feel it, you have to smell it, you have to taste it, everything. And even that Mars and Virgo is crisis. You like humiliation, that's part of the Virgo archetype, feeling the aloneness, and that in itself is needed too, in order for the person to kind of withdraw and start asking the question, why is this crisis happening? And from that point, start the deconditioning, gain knowledge, but gain self-knowledge of why is the crisis happening. And I think that's in my opinion, that's a big part of the Mars in Virgo there.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing we haven't talked about involving that Mars. So I mentioned it was squaring Neptune. It's also squaring I think that's a true node of Black Moon Lilith. And so she got the true node of Black Moon Lilith with Neptune on her ascendant. And so Black Moon Lilith, if you don't know what that is, it's actually nothing. It's just a calculation that we make. but since there's nothing actually there, but it's sort of like the balancing point of the moon's orbit, as far as how the moon comes closest to us in orbit and moves farthest away from us in orbit. So it's sort of this balancing point there. So it's really like this material that is kind of out there, out of a range of our consciousness, like sort of unconscious material that we're often in denial about ourselves. We often feel judged by other people for. Sometimes we don't want to face about ourselves. But as we integrate those qualities, and that material can really get projected too into relationships. But as we own that Black Moon Lilith, and we really step into Black Moon Lilith and who we are, it really brings us more into sort of like our overall wholeness. I mean, but in her case, with Black Moon Lilith being there with Neptune on the ascendant, I mean, you would kind of say Neptune right there is already going to maybe be able to kind of go into her having a little bit more difficulty, really like being herself and standing up for herself, and it's going to kind of play up some of these illusions and things.
And wouldn't you say that that's due to belief systems to give Sagittarius, being influenced by people's belief systems, opinions, where it weakens your own sense of self, with that Neptune conjunct the ascendant and her raw power? Because we were, who was it?
Okay, Star's back. Cool.
Dawn did a series a video on Black Moon Lilith and how it represents a raw power or our fears. And exactly what you said, when you own it, it's completely empowering. It's like you're taking charge of your life. And with that square to Mars, it totally makes sense that that's what we're working with here.
Yeah, and so like when you're speaking of the crisis, I think you missed that point. Maybe Star, but she was Jan was talking about the Mars and Virgo taking you into like a crisis or at times, or like the idea of going back into the swamp or whatever. But that's going to kind of hit. It's hitting that. It hits that Black Moon Lilith and that Neptune in your ascendant and descendant really hard. So it really forces that awareness, and that would kind of take us back even to that. There. Quincunx, or sometimes referred to in conjunct. Well, it's pretty wide though, but the Aquarius moon and the Mars Virgo. But anyway, as you had said, that Aquarius moon is squaring Uranus, but that goes into that kind of in going into the emotional body. You're able to start getting that sort of detached awareness to kind of clarify some of this stuff. I don't know does any of that make sense at all?
It all makes perfect sense. And I like that you brought up the Gemini point as well, because I would say in my early 20s, I had like maybe 7 Geminis in my life. I just seem to attract Geminis to me. So
that's Diana and me.
Yeah.
Hi.
Would you want to talk about your art or being an artist?
Yeah, show us your art. Don't we have a picture? I haven't seen it. I want to see it. Oh.
The next slide. I should have got you a clearer picture for that.
I like it because it looks like it's
so 12th house. I love it. I miss home. Where is home? Is that a map?
So I did that last spring, not quite this time, but I think it's dated April or May. And there's just been this deep desire to find home, and not necessarily like a house by home, but I sort of have that nomadic Sagittarius thing going on, and then this trauma childhood stuff where home never felt like home. And so I'd say maybe in the past year doing all this work, there's just been this like, I want to get back home. And I would say home is here in my heart. And then, yeah, no, that's not a map. That's just abstract clouds, hoodie, clouds, and the pants are kind of melting. And, there's my little dark Pluto creature hanging out with me. my little swampy
Oh,
creature.
nice.
I don't know.
A swamp creature. I like that.
You know, when I create it, a lot of artists use this very like, they have a concept and then they execute the concept. And I tend to work backwards. I tend to just let my subconscious do what it needs to do. And I got a lot of flack at art school for that, but it's neat. I've always wanted to let the subconscious run the show more than a linear thought process, which now that I know about astrology, I can really see that applying in my chart in so many different facets.
I don't know if it's the picture quality, but it almost looks to me like it's like Aquarius. They almost look like Aquarius glyphs to me. Or is am I crazy for thinking that?
Yeah, no, it says so there's little Aquarius glyphs like floating,
Okay.
and then
Yeah,
I
that's
miss
what
home is scattered. Like those letters are
Mhm.
like raining from that little cloud.
That's what I thought. Okay, it says like raining Aquarius. Yes, that exactly is like your chart.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool.
And then you can't see it, but I'm saying 1 + 1 = 11. That's what's in that little blurb.
Okay.
That's a lyric, a Tool lyric to the song Jimmy off of the album Anima, where he says 1 + 1 = 11. And that whole song is about going home too. Like it's about childhood trauma and reinvestigating all of that. And he says like, glow child, glow, I'm wide awake and heading home. So yeah, that's just a lot of home references in this.
That's pretty cool. With your Chiron in the 5th house, you know, your creative self, it's very healing, you know, Chiron, healing energy for you and for others. Beautiful.
Yeah, you know, it just made me realize a point we didn't make when we were talking about your Mars and Virgo is that it rules the Pluto polarity point, which is Aries 4th house. I don't know if I think we kind of touched on that earlier. But that would just sort of further go into this thing about you really striking out. I mean, on one hand, it's emotional, right? Your own inner emotional security. But because we're talking about Aries, that's very, you know, strident and, you know, full of life and like vitality and coming into access that, being wide awake and being really alive and, you know, and then at Mars and Virgo, we're so from this inner secure place, right? And you're able to kind of express that individuality and vitality in your relationships and feel secure in expressing that to other people and, you know, your actual feelings and everything. And then that Mars and Virgo ruling that again is I think the higher thing with that Mars and Virgo and Sagittarius in the 9th house would just be very, both kind of combination like intuitive and grounded and really in the moment. It's very earthy and sensual too. And it's also very creative and artistic, I think. And like I was saying before, it connects back into all that 12th house material too, because the Mercury rules it. Not sure do you have anything else, Diana, you want to say about anything?
I think for me, the message, it's truly connecting to the emotional body, embracing vulnerability, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you know, willingness to challenge the things that you believe about yourself and the things that you've been told through childhood, all those experiences. It's just getting out of your comfort zone and willingly work on you. I think that applies for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my last statement there. Yeah.
I mean, I guess another thing too we haven't really talked about is just the sun. I mean, even the sun as your sole purpose this lifetime is again in that 12th house in Sagittarius. So that's just a further sign of you going back in there and accessing that. And I really think that Mars in Virgo is really important because I was just thinking now too, it's, it sextiles the North Node, it trines the South Node of Venus. So it's really accessing that whole nodal signature there in a harmonious way. So it's going to be able to kind of also help you draw on that material. And but I think that combination of Neptune and Black Moon and Lilith on your ascendant is something that it squares. Is something I'm sure has been very difficult, but again, these same signatures, like as you kind of resolve this and integrate things and do this work, I mean, there's incredible power in all of this. I mean, it's a really super powerful 10th house. Neptune and Black Moon and Lilith on the ascendant and Sagittarius. I mean, again, that can be very, very, powerful kind of visionary person.
I think you were saying about Mars, it's in Virgo, it's helping her discern through about that crisis, that slump, like that discern what's true, what's not true. And it also I think it also pushes her to connect to a spiritual system, that aloneness, that inner aloneness, that emptiness, purpose is perhaps for her to embrace that spiritual reality, which is her 12th house. I think that's very pronounced in her chart. If that makes sense.
Definitely. And sometimes I feel like, I mean, sure, Uranus is trauma. I mean, it can go with that. But I just don't want to, that's definitely not all that Uranus is. I mean, it's all I'm going to say. And Uranus can be an ally. And I've definitely been working, and I feel like learning a lot more about how Uranus can be an ally. And Uranus is very actually empowering. And Uranus wants you to be alive. Uranus wants you to be really alive. And, you just look at like the glyph of Uranus. It's like this cross of matter on the spirit fire, and it's holding up those crescents of soul, right? And sure, that signature also holds some probably past life trauma that's feeding into all of this, but there's also this really that's a lot of like creative potency right there that you can really access and feel your work.
As well as liberation,
Liberation, yeah. Definitely.
That's awesome, Star, that you're embracing that you're doing the inner work and exploring all these different avenues. Would you say that started when Saturn was crossing your 12th house? Or I know you mentioned the year 2014.
Well, that was when I started the deeper therapy work, but been in the support group since 2009, started yoga in 2010. I mean, I started studying like higher consciousness in my early 20s. I don't know. I just really related when Gray talked about the 60-year-old.
Oh yeah.
Feel frustrated because I've definitely had moments where I'm like, I do so much more work than any average person, and why is this still so hard? And that's also why Jason Hawley is one of my biggest inspirations, because I listened to his talk on shame and forgiveness, and he gets into that, being willing to work on the deep patterns of Pluto regardless of the results is what matters the most. We live in such a culture of like, we got to be fixed and it's got to be fast and packaged, and he really just, that talk just inspired me beyond everything, when he's just like, it's just the willingness to show up and work through it no matter how hard it is, or no matter how many times it circles around. It's just that what did Jeff say, the value's in the effort. So
and that's truly, that brings, what your statement brings in the polarity of your 12th house, the Virgo. It's all about the actual work, the effort. That's what counts, because that puts our focus. It keeps us focused, it keeps us in the moment.
Yeah, I feel like we should touch on one thing too, because we're just looking at a natal chart, and I think it'd be important just to mention like how set off your chart actually is right now. With you have Saturn on your ascendant, Jupiter just stationed on your in between your Pluto and Saturn. It's going to cross back and forth over your Saturn. It's going to come back over your Pluto as Uranus is coming to set everything off. So Uranus has already set off Saturn. Uranus is heading for Pluto right now as we're talking. So you definitely want to be working with Uranus, because Uranus is going to oppose Pluto. In fact, Uranus is going to station retrograde later this year directly opposite your Ceres and Pluto, and then come back over it, and it's going to start doing this thing. Uranus is already squaring your nodes, but then you're going to go into like Uranus basically setting off your Pluto polarity point as it's also squaring Venus. And Uranus is not going to let you stay in a stuck situation. So, and I think that in the end, when stuff does fall apart with Uranus, it's because there's something much more bigger coming your way that's going to bring you a lot more vitality to you. And, you know, I feel like sometimes Uranus just kind of clears the field, but then there's like this new life that comes out of that eventually. But this pattern is going to be really set off by Uranus in this next time period. So I don't know if you're already getting a sense of that at all. Yeah. Okay.
Things feel very electrical.
Yeah. I would imagine.
What, do you have any suggestions for working with Uranus, or just awareness, or?
I mean, yeah, you got to express things. You need to find outlets. You need to have ways to express it, I think. I think going into your emotional body, like we've already been talking, and one thing that's nice is it's going to be sextiling your moon in Aquarius. And in EA, we do work with Uranus ruling Aquarius. Mm-hmm. So there's some resonance there. And yeah, I think the more you can kind of come back in, and when things get really stirred up in a relationship, and you're able to come back into yourself and your emotional body and really try to integrate that stuff and not just be like projecting everything. But also just kind of really going after opportunity. You know, I think, I really think Uranus just really wants us to be awake, and Uranus wants us to be really active and alive and empowered, those kind of things. I mean, yeah, it's very, very electric. So, I mean, working with like your art maybe, or something else, or.
I think part of Uranus too is letting go,
Mm-hmm.
Afraid to let it go, to close the door and lock it. And
yeah, hopefully what I was hoping it'd be doing is helping you break out of like the conditioning, or so like that Libra 10th, which would be kind of like looking for approval or just wanting to fit in. You're not really being yourself. You're not really being who you are, because you're wanting to fit in, or you're wanting people to like you, or Uranus doesn't care about that. Uranus like wants you to be who you are, and not what the culture is telling you to be, or the people are telling you to be.
And about expressing too, when you look up the third house ruled by Neptune, which puts it back right next to her sun, in the first house, it truly, I mean, that aspect there needs to be strengthened, I feel, because of the square that it makes. And yeah, it needs to be strengthened. So I think a lot of it, and for me, having the skip step too, is like speaking your truth, like it or not, like speaking your truth, I think is so healing.
Yeah.
Practicing that.
Definitely.
And it's also, part of that Mercury in the 12th house.
Yeah. No, is there anything, or I don't know, I don't know how where we are even with time, or if other people have questions too, or I don't really where we're at with all this, Linda.
We're at about 1 hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we open it up in case anybody has a question or anything? Like that's, I don't know if he's even on this meeting right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
can I say something? I think you did an amazing job. I mean, it's lots of, but I have a suggestion for that 12th house, like the Uranus in the 12th house. I think that art can give us a good connection to the unconscious. I think her drawing are really a picture of the inner child. I think that it can really reach her. It can really bring her in contact with what is there. Also, because the Mercury is in the 12th house in Sagittarius, I think can be something like automatic writing or journaling or interpreting the dream. The 12th house does that come out a lot in dreams. It's so close to the consciousness, you know. So also, I have another suggestion. I was curious to see if Star had connection with children. That's North Node in Cancer in the 7th house. For me, is establishing a contact with children, deeply connecting with at least one at a time, listening to their story, listening to who they are, what they can express. And I think it's the connection that can really bring her back to her own inner child. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that.
Is there anybody else that has, I don't, is anybody else even on this meeting? I'm not really sure. I guess I can't really see.
Yeah, there's about 8 people in this meeting.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say?
Yeah, I just want to say something. My Pluto also has skip steps with the nodes in the same houses. And I would just suggest to Star that she has a choice to choose partners who will embrace her vulnerability and, of course, not to dominate her and who will respect the feminine. And I'll also point out that the nodes of Pluto are conjunct her nodes. So the south node of Pluto is conjunct her south node, and the north node of Pluto is conjunct her north node. So she would be an amazing representative for the collective evolution, as Pluto is opposing the its own, it is on its own nodes right now within orb.
That's a great point.
Yes, I love what Linda say about, and it's so true, you know, about having, you have the power, you have the choice to embrace those people who embrace the vulnerability in you. Like it's a beautiful thing to have, to make that choice, you know?
Yeah, and she also has the power to say no to that which does not honor the feminine, because the moon in Aquarius rules the north node, and of course to say no to anyone or anything that does not honor her values or who she truly is.
Yeah. I also like what, I don't know her name, but she spoke about kids. And I think
Marie.
That's the beautiful point. And I think that would be part too of connecting to your own innocence, which could bring a lot of healing power and spark more of your creative self, you know, your creativity, your drawings, and as Marie was saying. Very good.
Yeah, I was thinking that if she established a contact with children through art, through drawing, you know, like it's kind of like a double whammy, that it can bring children to express themselves, to talk. And at the same time, she is sharing herself. You know, like her drawing is just extraordinary. I mean, this is for me a way that she should really pursue.
Kind of like an art therapist, maybe. Is that what
Yeah.
you're sort of thinking?
Well, art as therapy sounds like a wonderful. That seventh house, I mean, it's through other that she connect to herself and to children in particular.
Star, do you have siblings?
Pardon me?
Do you have siblings, Star?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely am agreeing with that. Some sort of you could be a really powerful, because all these things actually really work into being a really powerful mentor.
Especially with her creative art, with that Chiron in the fifth. Like,
And kids that grow up neglected and abused, I mean, it makes such an impact, and it's you know, there's so much that comes out of that that impacts the person, and it takes really the whole life to be healing from that. And the most powerful people, like, I mean, you coming from that place have like really tremendous gifts to offer others that have had that experience, that you could be like a real mentor and healer to. It's very true.
Yeah, and Gray, also I love the look of that grand trine sitting right in the middle there between Venus, Mars, and Chiron. And so Venus and Mars are the natural rulers of the first and the seventh houses, and they are trining Chiron in the fifth house of children and creativity. So we can see that repeating theme.
Yeah, I was thinking that with the Chiron. That's a good point, though. I didn't think about all that. Yeah.
I've always been too afraid to have my own kids, just because I didn't ever want what happened to me to like have another person go through, was how I looked at it when I was younger. But with my friends that have good kids, I've definitely started to show up and be present for them in the way that was suggested. So that was really beautiful. And then the way that the Pluto, what Linda was saying about Pluto's nodes are actually synced up with my nodes, was I've learned a lot about holding genuine space for others and resolving PTSD, and just, like our society is very Capricorny. And so how do I maybe help others move into their emotional body, just as I'm learning how to do now? I've started to toy with that in my head, like how to do that, or how to present that information, or just hold the space. I don't know.
I think your art is a big way to do that. You know, I like how you let your subconscious talk to you through your art. It's really beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It gets tricky, but
Yeah, and also we do evolve through the emotional body, and so the nodes are evolving, and with your north node in Cancer conjunct the north node of Pluto, it's like Pluto is evolving your egocentric structure, and Pluto itself, the soul, is evolving itself through this process.
Yeah, it's Pluto's scoring its own nodes too. It's interesting. Your sun's kind of near the south node of Uranus too, but it's just not that close, but it's pretty close. Does anybody else have a comment? Or I like all the comments so far that have been coming in. I don't know if there's anybody else wants to speak up or say something.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll say one more thing. There is a kite pattern in this chart, and the tip of the kite is the north node. And so this is a very powerful pattern. And so that north node is so important in this chart. Mm.
Yeah. And it was kind of funny too, just with the timing of this, how long it took. We got star and Aquarius moon delivered the dark moon in Aquarius before a solar eclipse. It's going to be on our lot of fortune. So I think it maybe worked out the timing of this. But yeah, that Aquarius moon is very, very important. Like ruling that Cancer North Node, like you were just saying. I don't know if anyone else, or Star, if you have anything else you want to say, we could probably wrap it up, I'm guessing.
She got disconnected.
Maybe she's not here anymore.
She got disconnected.
Do you have anything else, Deanna?
No. Does anybody else?
No, I don't think so. All right, cool. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I think we can probably end it then. I'm guessing, right?
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. Yeah, that was fantastic, Gray. And thank you, Diana. And thank you, Star, when you listen to the recording. Thank you so much. And I'll just unmute everybody now to say thank you and to, tell you how they felt about the meeting.
Thank you. That was good work.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks again and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.